everyone, welcome to another episode of High Energy Girl. And today's awesome guest is Marney Andes. And she is a born and bred farm girl from Nebraska, a consultant, educator, and entrepreneur who has dedicated her career to supporting teams and individuals as they develop and grow. And she is the author of the awesome book called Start with the GiveMe Shots, inspired by lessons from her father. Gives me chills just thinking about it. So let's go say hello to Marney. Hey everyone, welcome to High Energy Girl, a podcast helping women to age stronger because it is never too late to get fit, be strong, and feel sexy. I'm your host, Tracy Gluhide, health coach and personal trainer and founder of highenergygirl.com. Each week, we will either have a guest interview, which will provide you encouragement or an actionable tip to help you age stronger, or I will do a solo episode. Please also join our awesome Facebook group called High Energy Girls, and I'm looking forward to see you on the inside of that group and hope you enjoy today's show. Guess what, everyone? My book is out. It is a revised and updated edition of a book I wrote 5 years ago called No Frickin' Way, 21 Days to Ditch the Diet and Lose Weight the Keto Way by Loving Yourself to Health. When I first wrote the original book, I was not a believer in the low-carb movement, but after all the years of research I've done, I am sold out for life. In this book, you will learn about all the lies you have been fed, how to engage in loving self-care, how to eat nourishing foods that provide massive energy, why the ketogenic diet is not a fad, how to heal your body through fasting, why you should move your body to get stronger, and how to create an empowering mindset. Start reading now and finally achieve the high energy and positive body image you deserve. Check it out on Kindle, on Amazon. And if you like it, please leave us a review because this will help more people find it. I really want to inspire people to not deprive themselves, but to nourish themselves with loving self-care and amazingly healthy food so that they can age stronger. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I enjoyed writing it. Hey, Marney, welcome to the show. So happy to see you.
Thanks, Tracy. Thanks again for having me.
So for the audience that has not heard of you yet, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I always start by introducing myself as a born and bred Nebraska farm girl. Most people don't necessarily know that. I've lived in Colorado for 22 years and have had quite the experience just even living here professionally and personally, but that's really where my roots are. I grew up in a little farming community in the western part of Nebraska called Wallace, Nebraska. And so I grew up with farmers and teachers, and that really set the stage for what I sort of pursued and things that I did in life, and certainly the values that I have. I have had an interesting career. I've done a number of things, but most recently I've probably spent a lot of time in professional development and leadership development. And certainly along those lines, especially with, your listeners, have certainly worked with women who are continuing to build a thriving career, but also just thinking about how they balance that out with their personal life.
Balance. Oh yeah. That is, for a business owner, that's a very hard word to swallow.
Right.
Right.
Well, it's interesting. It's actually one of the lessons in the book I recently published, which we can, get in and talk about. One of the lessons that I talk about is work while others are on break. And as a business owner, I know you've been part of that. I've been part of that, and starting my own organizations before, and certainly having been a consultant before, that there's never a perfect work-life balance. So I always love it when people ask me, like, how do you do it? And how is a mom or a wife? And how do you, it's actually not about balance. It's about trade-offs. Mm-hmm. So where do you want to put your time, and where do you need to put your energy for maybe finite amounts of time? And so I talk to people about the value of that lesson and how modeling it in a way that's being more realistic than thinking that we do have to have this perfect equal balance all the time. And I would love to hear, like, you as a business owner, like how do you think about balance, and how have you done that successfully in your life?
Well, that's funny that you ask because I take Wednesdays off so I could go to the beach because the beach is not crowded on Wednesdays, so it's easy to find parking and it's just like a battery recharge. So, like you said, take or work while other people are taking breaks. So, I would work on like Saturday while most people are out playing to kind of compensate for that Wednesday off.
Right.
So that's my big thing. I can't wait till my husband can do it with me. But he wants to farm. I was asking him the other day, Marty, I said, okay, if you can retire, and he'll never retire, he's a workaholic, but if you could and spend your time just doing something you love that's productive, what would it be? He's like, farming. So
And what is it that draws him to it? Did he grow up in that way, or is it just something he's always wanted to do?
yeah, he grew up on 100 acres of walnut trees. And
Okay.
his dad was a farmer, and so he was farming until they got screwed by a tomato grow or a tomato canner or something like that. But he loves it. So the fact that you got to grow up on that, that's he
Right.
tells story after story. That's cool.
Well, it's one of those things where if you've experienced it, but I also think that you can look at it from the outside in, even if you haven't been on a farm, that there's something about, and I bet this is what your husband partially is drawn to, if not a lot of it's being the drawn, is when you get to see something that you've created and something that you own from beginning to end, like no one's coming around to check on whether or not you've done that. I mean, I think that's, if there's anything you learn growing up on a farm, it's learning to think like an owner, because you are. I mean, even as kids of a farmer, our livelihood depended on that. And I tell stories around how I remember messing up, and yet my dad would still give me a number of opportunities to help drive tractor or drive combine. We farmed wheat and corn primarily, being in Nebraska. And there's just something about that work condition where I didn't think about it. I was like, oh, I'm driving a tractor for 8 hours. I was like, no, I'm driving this tractor because this is how my mom and dad help pay for us to do things. And so I'm contributing to that. There's just something really incredible about the ownership that not only you exhibit and you work toward, but also the ownership you get to feel as being part of it, which I think is really cool as a farm kid growing up.
And that's missing, I think, in this generation. I mean, I remember when we live on 5 acres here, and I remember when my husband first planted the orchard and there was no irrigation, and me and the kids had hoses, like, I don't know, 300, 400 feet of hose connected and trying to water by hand that orchard for like 2 years. Um, oh my gosh, that was a lot of work. But hey, it's memories. They loved it out here.
Oh
So,
yeah.
so I want to go back because you jumped ahead to the book, but let's talk about that. Like, I know you wrote an amazing book, but what inspired you to even do that? That's a huge task. I know, I've done it.
Yeah, it is a huge task. And I think, I had aspirations of writing a book years ago, and for a variety of reasons didn't do it. When I really thought about the fact of writing a book, it had hit me that there were lessons that I had learned from my dad growing up that, without really even thinking about them, whether I was in a personal setting or professional setting, I would share stories from my dad from time to time. He was a great storyteller. I mean, he was the guy that people would want to sit down with him in the cafe and just talk for hours. And he just had this really great rapport with people. So I remembered those stories and I continued to tell them. And it was, I lost my dad in 2012. So that was a part of the driving force, was how could I help his lessons live on now that he was already gone? And then the other part of it was, how could I actually get really, really specific to the point where I knew what all the stories were and what all the lessons were. And I tell people there's 8 core lessons that are in the book that I decided to go with, which is why the book's called Start with the GiveMe Shots, 8 Homegrown Lessons for Business and Life. And my dad and my mom taught me way more lessons than that. But when
Sure.
I sat down and looked at those 8 lessons, what I found were not only the ones that I was sharing stories about, but those were the ones that I was, quite frankly, were part of my value system, I realized when I really reflected on them. So it was part to honor my dad. It was part for me to really be clear as to what the stories were. And, maybe the third extended piece to that was, how can I continue to share it in a way with others that they could actually take it and do something with it without having to always be in a conversation with me? I could put something in a living, breathing document that people could continue to use and read over time.
Yeah, so you're not only honoring your legacy, but you're doing, what is it, leverage. You're leveraging your time.
Right, right,
That's awesome.
right.
So tell us a little bit more. I want some juicy details about those 8 values that and why did you choose those 8?
Right. So, one of the, I'll start actually with the last lesson of the book. All of the lessons of the book are written as statements, and these were really, in some cases, unique ways in which my dad approached some of these lessons and some of the stories. The 8th lesson of the book is in the form of a question. And it was a question that I found, even after moving to Colorado, when I did, I would still call my dad almost every day on my drive home from work. And many times it was just to share what went on in the day and find out what he had done on the farm or what he and my mom were up to. And most of the time, he would start the conversation by asking me, "What did you do for the good of the community today, kid?" And that question, he didn't just ask me that question. I found out, probably the last decade of his life, he asked almost everybody that question. And so for him, it was a conversation starter. It was, what'd you do for the good of the community? Which was really just say, like, what'd you do today? Like, what'd you do in some way, shape, or form that either was good for you, good for others, whatnot. And, when I started thinking about that question, it was actually what got me writing the book, because how I've used that question over time is really to reflect. And so I share certainly with my readers in the book that even the smallest dose of reflection every day can just pay dividends in your life. And it can do it in a number of ways. You can be incredibly grateful for what you have. You can identify things that if you were too busy to see them, you might say, gosh, I didn't realize how good that was and how I want to do more of that. Maybe I need to carve out time for that. Or I got so busy, I forgot to reflect and think that, boy, I've been doing this thing over and over again, and I don't like it. I want to do something about it. And so I used it in the sense of, it was how my dad got me thinking about my day every day. And sometimes I'd say, I didn't do much of anything, Dad. Or other days I'd have these incredible stories to share. And it really just reminded me that we all have that opportunity. So I've shared with my readers in the book, and we'll share with your listeners now, is that it doesn't have to be a form of meditation. It doesn't have to be this perfect journaling exercise. That if everybody takes a moment at the end of every day and think about what good they did, and think about it in 3 questions, which is, what did I do today? What do I think or feel about what I did? And what do I want to do about it? That is really, really important for all of us, especially as women. And I think as we get older, we have more responsibility. We think about all the things we have yet to maybe even accomplish, or what we have to do. And it really is important to slow down and sort of sift through the noise, if you will. And so why I say that was the question that got me writing the book, it did. Because the pandemic hit, I had talked about writing a book. And then suddenly when I thought about what I would write about, and it became these lessons, it was this first one that ended up being the last lesson. I thought, that's the reason why I need to write the book. I had been missing it. I'd been doing the same thing over and over again. And so I finally decided that's what would get me writing. So that's one of the lessons that is very unique to my dad, and that I really had a great time, quite frankly, writing about it and sharing it with others.
Well, that is so lovely, because really, truly, the world that we're shifting into is about making our communities better. It is about putting forth a humanitarian effort so that we can be in harmony instead of adversity. It's almost like things have to get worse before they can get better. I feel like we are in that space right now, in this last year, but it's shifting into the next phase, which is going to be people helping people. back to where it should have been a long time ago, because we're all connected. You know, we're all human, and we're all have the same color blood, and we're all, if we all could just collaborate. I think his question was perfect, exactly the way it was stated.
Right. You know,
Beautiful.
and yeah, and thank you. I do too. And the more that I've thought about it, it's interesting. As I wrote about it, it was actually trying to simplify it. My dad was an incredibly generous person. He was really mindful of what he did with his money and how he invested in people, not just with money, but with time and resources. And so it has that aspect of it. And as I've been sharing that lesson with more and more people, even beyond what I wrote in the book, to what you just said, which is what we need right now, I could not agree with you more. I think, as I think about that question, when I think of where there's disagreements in this society and where we've maybe gone sideways with one another, is because everything's so noisy, and we're sort of just going along, or we might get pulled by a certain group that says, here's how we all believe, or it's like, if we just all slowed down for a second and just said, what do I think about that? Okay. And how would I want to show up, and how would I expect other people to show up with me? I think that many times when we're making either, having disagreements, and not because we all have to get along. I actually talk about that in my book. This isn't about being agreeable with one another. It's actually about respecting one another, but you have to slow down enough to even be able to do that. So I do think, if there is this greater giving back in that lesson, that if we all intentionally took time for ourselves and took care of ourselves in that way, because I knew you were doing it and I was doing it, then together we would have the wherewithal, and we'd have the mental capacity, the physical capacity, because we've taken the time for ourselves to actually be able to give time for each other.
Yep, absolutely. It's funny that you said that, because the subtitle to my book is Loving Yourself to Health. And I tell clients, you can't pour from an empty cup. So by filling your love cup up first, you're better able to serve in other areas of your life without resentment, because now you're satisfied. You're like, your gas tank is full, and now you can chug along and go and help other people. But I think that I like what you said about, I remember a long time ago that it was okay to disagree without shaming one another, or scorning people for their beliefs. Like, we never talked about religion or politics, back in the day. Now, all of a sudden, if you don't think like I think, then you're a bad person. You know, my mother-in-law always says, everybody has a right to their own stupid opinion, but who cares? It's not meant to start wars over.
Right. Right. Well, and if we all honor the fact that we do have differences, I, maybe it was just because, for whatever reason, it wasn't coming out in a way that we all had to actually navigate it. So now it's like, okay, well then how are we equipping ourselves with the tools to navigate the conversations? The differences were all there. They were there. And to your point, maybe we didn't talk about them, but now it's a way of like, but we still can talk about them, and we can still survive with one another. And I always love when people are like, you do realize that most people don't pay as much attention to you as you think they are, right? And not to you, to me, to anybody, right? And so I'm always thinking, like, then for us to get caught up in that is just, insane. From a neighborly squabble to, my coworker did this, or it's like, you know what, if everybody just slows down. And I love that as your subtitle of your book, because I think that's absolutely true. And too many times, I think when people get into those situations where now there is disagreement, there is argument, there is resentment, if you probably slow down and look, when people are in those spaces, you think that's less about where they're projecting it onto me, and more about how they're feeling about it, about themselves.
Yep.
And so I love that that's your subtitle of your book. I think it's great.
Mirror. It's a mirror. When I love that you said that, because we don't talk about this a lot, but when we find something that we don't like about somebody else, often it's because it's a reflection of our own selves, right?
Right.
I just like the whole concept of, like, back to your dad's question, we're a vibrational universe, it's like everything. If you go down to the very basic level, the atomic plane or atomic sphere, we're all about vibration. And when he's asked that question, what'd you do to make the community better? I think I got that right. um by doing that, you're raising the vibration. Like, do you know that one person can, if they raise their vibration, it can affect like 8 million people? Imagine if
Wow.
everybody did that, right?
Right.
So,
Right.
okay, we went on a total rabbit trail. So,
I love it though.
so Marty, tell me more about the book. I want to hear all the juicy details about, like, what are the basic ones or your favorite ones that you think our
Mhm.
audience would love to learn?
Well, I do, this was lesson number 2 in my book is actually start with the give me shots. And it was then had to become the title of my book because the story was so vivid. And it's one of those lessons that I have used over and over. I've used it when talking with friends around what they're really good at and what they want to continue to lean into. I've talked about this story, which I'm going to share with you, when I have shared what our strategic planning and vision should be with the CEO of a company that I've worked with. So it has application across the board. And the story is very much grounded in basketball and athletics. I played every sport I could growing up. My dad was an avid athletic sports guy. My mom grew up playing as many sports as she could and was allowed to do, quite frankly, with what women's sports were for some time. So my mom was a great volleyball player. My dad was a great football player, basketball player. So we just grew up playing sports. And I also tell people, when you grow up in a small town, usually you have to kind of participate in everything or you don't have enough kids for everything. So I always joke that, you had to go out for basketball and volleyball and run track or you didn't have enough kids for the team. So it was, the story's really grounded. It was one fall day. I went out on our driveway and I was shooting the basketball around. My dad was by the far pins about 100 yards away feeding the cattle because we also raised purebred Angus cattle when I was growing up. And I was just launching the basketball from all parts of the court, missing most of the shots, making one every, now and then. And I just remember my dad yelling up to me up on the hill, "Marn, start with the give me shots." And I had heard him say this over and over again. This was not a new lesson to me. And so I was a little bit embarrassed, quite frankly. So I just, okay, I took the ball, started dribbling around. And the next thing I know, I see out of the corner of my eye, my dad's he's just speed walking up the hill. And he comes up to me, he takes the ball out of my hands and he says, "You have got to start with the give me shots." And what the give me shots were to my dad were the shots that were really close to the basket on both sides and in front. So it was like 2 feet off of the basketball hoop and right in front. Those were the give me shots to him. And what he believed was that if players practiced those as intentionally as anything else, they would actually hone their best skills for a shot. And if they got so good at those shots, they would be so ingrained in them that, one, they'd rarely ever miss those shots. But two, then when they were challenged, they had a much greater chance of making those shots. And the third part of it was, if you got so good at those, the further you reached out from the basket, the more likely you were to make those shots too. And the way I have taken that lesson for the rest of my life is whatever you're good at, that is your give me shot. Whatever makes you uniquely skilled, whatever makes you unique in your pocket of friends, within your colleagues, whatever your business may be, that not only do you know what those things are, but are you intentionally practicing them every day? Because what tends to happen for people is we look at all the things we don't do well and we think to ourselves, this is, we need to actually, work on all these weaknesses and we need to do all these things and we need to, get better at those things. And what I try to tell people is it's actually better for you to make your give me shots so much better And I give an example, and this is one that you could probably empathize with. So one of my give me shots, I always tell people, I love to speak. I love to give big presentations. I love to do those things, but it's not because I just do them and I got to check the box a long time ago and go, oh, I'm just so good at those, I don't have to practice that anymore. That's actually a give me shot. I have to practice all the time. I'm really uber focused on what my stories will be. I practice presentations. And so when people come up to me afterwards, they go, gosh, I wish I was so naturally good at that stuff like you. And I tell them, it's because I practice it all the time. So I think about that. And I always ask, when I'm having conversations like this, Tracy, I'd love to know, like, what are your give me shots and how do you practice those? Because it's one thing for me to say it because I wrote a book about it, but I love it when people like you share it so your listeners can hear, like, this is what I know I'm really good at and this is how I practice it every day.
Oh, wow. That's a tough question. I think my give me shots are inspiring people, like my clients and stuff, to change their perspective on their health goals. And I am very spiritual, and I feel like God speaks through me, because some of this stuff that I say when I'm coaching, like, I don't know where it came from. And sometimes I'll be in the middle of a group coaching session and I'll just say, okay, what's next? And the words come out. But I feel like that's my gift, is just being an inspirer, I'm 55. I do CrossFit. I love to lift weights. And by sharing my stories, it encourages others that they can also get stronger. It doesn't happen overnight, but it empowers your mind, and your body at the same time. So,
Right.
but I think inspiring women to make a change is my give me shot. Just talking it, like you said, the public speaking. I don't practice as much, other than I'm always on the phone with a client or in a group conversation, but I am very tuned in and tapped into, like, my guides.
Right.
Oh, okay. I don't know where you are in that realm, but can I pull you a card? An angel
Sure.
card?
Yeah, I would love that.
I rarely do this for guests on the show, but you inspired me. So
I
I
love it. Yeah.
I do energy work, like I do Reiki and Qigong, and I also do another modality, and I've done the Angel Academy, and but these are ridiculously crazy, and I'll have you chew on it for 24 hours, Marney, and then report back to me and tell me how it kind of came to fruition in your life. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you for playing and being fun.
Oh,
Okay. Archangel Michael and Archangel Raphael step forward to encourage you to take a vacation. They are here to remind you that getting away and taking a trip can refresh and rejuvenate the mind, body, and soul. And this is hilarious. There is a laptop and like she's writing. Check that out.
I love that. Okay.
Where do you want to go?
Right.
Think
Yeah.
about it.
No, I love that. Well, I've already been thinking about this. I just, we actually just recently booked the trip where we're going to go. And part of it is because it's this place that I've been going since I started writing the book, just to get away and to be able to write, because I feel like there's just some sort of energy at that place for me. But anyway, yes, let me think more on that. But I love that. I'm all over. Well, and I want to get back to this, not because I'm like trying to distract away from it, but your give me shot in doing that, you are practicing it. I mean, I'm just thinking about, like, the fact you host this podcast, you're talking to people, on a daily basis around that. And so sometimes when people, are probably hearing our conversation like this, they might even say to themselves, well, that's really easy because, Tracy has her give me's and she's super good and she's successful. And Marney wrote a book. And even though this is the first time I'm hearing her, I can go look her up online and I can see that. I don't really know what my give me shots are. And so I always share with people that, ask a friend, ask someone that knows you and sees you and say, what do you see me doing that you think I'm just naturally good at, that I just inherently know how to do? And ask for people to give you some feedback, because what many times can happen, and I think women get in this trap for whatever reason, is that we get so busy being so many things to other people, we forget what it is that we really think about ourselves and what we are, who we are as individuals. And so if you need that help, that's one of the ways in which I've guided people through, to say, ask other people to think, what's easy, what comes natural to you, and start exploring what other people think are your give me shots if you can't come up with your own. And then of course the second to that is always, and how are you practicing them every day? And if you're not, that's the encouragement, is to start stepping into that and finding some way, shape, or form, some time that you can carve out to continue practicing that. Because more than likely, those give me shots are not only the things you do well, they're probably the things that you have a lot of passion around, you get a lot of energy from, and if you're doing those things consistently, imagine the energy that's continuing to radiate into other parts of your life. So I think it's a good reminder, especially coming out of the pandemic. I think a lot of people were in a place where, you were you feel combined, or what you were trying to do. And now's the time to sort of rejuvenate and get back to the things you do well, and just celebrate those things and do those things.
Yeah, that's funny that you said that. Have you heard of the book Strength Finders? Because what you're
Yeah, and
saying,
I've done it before too. Yes, years ago. So it is very similar to that. And, but it could be as simple as, I am able to just connect with people. Maybe you don't even recognize the fact that a give me shot is that you're just really good at connecting with people and connecting people to one another. And maybe you don't even acknowledge that that's a skill, but it is. It's incredibly rewarding. It's incredibly helpful. And there's some people that are probably introverted that are like, that's not my thing.
yeah, that's funny that you said that. My son, one of my kids lives in New York, and one of his friends said, "You are the best party guest because you talk to everybody and you trade numbers and then you connect with them later." I'm like, "Oh, okay,
Right.
cool." So let me
Right.
ask you some more about personal stuff, Marney. Like, tell us some of your habits and your practices in your life that you have found made you into the incredible woman that you are right now.
Well, it's certainly been an exploration, and I tell everybody, I feel like life is just one big experiment. So I'm always experimenting with things, but I will tell you that the last couple of years have actually been really powerful for me. I was a college athlete. I said, I played sports all through high school. I was a college athlete. I played 1 year of basketball, walked away from that for other, a number of reasons, but I'd always sort of had this really interesting dynamic with working out and, eating healthy and doing all these things, and sort of thinking about my physical health as much as I did my mental health in my 20s and my 30s, and even early on in my 40s. In the last couple of years, I really started to switch some things up. One, because I had some issues just from a health standpoint. I had to get a cervical fusion. I've had issues with my neck and my back and so forth. And I could have looked at that and said, well, that's going to be just something that, really limits me. But I decided a couple of years ago that I just needed to rethink how I was thinking about my physical fitness and what I did every day. And what used to happen was I would say to myself, well, you're an early morning workout person. You got to get up at 5. You lift 5 days a week. You do this much cardio. And what started to happen is I had like this really weird guilty feeling that if I missed it, well, now I'm sunk because I've already told myself I don't work out at night. And well, now that I didn't do that, do I just let the eating go off, the wheels go off the train type, go off the bus type thing. And it just got to be this really weird, environment for me. So a few years ago, when I was talking to my nurse practitioner, and I just said, I'm really struggling with this. And she goes, it doesn't have to be that hard. I just think you need to, move your body more and be mindful about what you're eating. And the simplicity of it, I actually took to heart. So I stopped saying to myself, you're a 5 a.m. workout person, and if you miss it, you're sunk. I changed that to being, you're going to move your body every day. That's it. You can go move it the way you used to, which was lifting or doing hard cardio or whatever, or you might move it by taking a walk out in the neighborhood, but you're going to move your body every day, regardless of what time or what you're doing. And then the second piece to that was I was really trying to think about, the fact that I'd always been a pretty healthy eater, I would say. I mean, I'd done everything from watching friends who did physique competitions to how am I just trying to be mindful of getting the right balance of stuff. And I about a year and a half ago tried doing intermittent fasting because I was trying to think about what the rewards would be, not only for the health wise, but also just hormones and things I was going through. And I had a few friends that said they had done it for a few weeks and it didn't work for them. So I thought, well, if they did it for a few weeks and it didn't work, maybe if I did it longer, it might. And I did do it. I committed to it for 30 days and felt pretty good. Didn't really notice a huge change, but I didn't feel worse. And so then I thought, I'll do another 30. And then it started working for me for whatever reason. So I've now been doing that for the last year and a half. And I think the message here, Tracy, is I'm not, I'm with your background, you advise clients on a number of things and probably have your own preference for yourself. And I just found that it really is what works for you. And for me, that's working. And so I'm going to do it. I'm going to move my body every day. And I'm doing intermittent fasting where I eat for 8 hours and I'm off for 16. And that seems to work for me. And so I think that's probably the message, instead of getting too bogged down for things that don't work for you. And the simplicity of it has been really rewarding for me too.
Yeah, and try it. If it doesn't work, try something else. To
Right.
me, we're bio-individual, right? So, but I'm a big proponent of intermittent fasting and taking a rest day. And the rest day could be a walk or a yoga class or something, because that's when your body heals. That's when the transformations happen, and even muscle repair when you're resting. It's like professional athletes even have an off season, right?
Right.
So I love it. And I love the fact that you said just even taking a walk. I mean, we need to connect with nature more, be outside, get the rays from the sun and, the energy from the earth. I'm kind of
Right.
a little hippie. So, but it's important and people often don't. Here's a question for you. Who do you think is more apt to get skin cancer? An office worker or a construction worker?
I feel like it's a trick question. So then I should go the opposite. So I'll say I think the obvious choice is the construction worker, but I'm going to say the office worker because they don't think that they have to do it.
Yeah. No, that's not why. Okay, so it's the compound effect. First of all, being out in the sun gives us energy. It's not a bad thing like we've been led to believe. And it's like microdoses, right? Like the compound effect. So you build up that. But the office worker, they're in the office every day until that week that they go to Hawaii, and then they fry their ass and then they're sunburnt and,
Right. Yeah. Well, I think, what a great analogy for so many things. It's, the challenge with it is if you're not doing it, and I think consistently, that almost sounds like it's too like a process, if you will. But if you think about all the things in your life, if you want to do that and feel the rewards of that, then do it often, do it, throughout your life. Don't just wait for sparks to do that. I actually, it's funny. I talked about that from a vacation standpoint. I think we're in this society, and I have actually written about this recently, about the fact that the way we think about taking off time is the fact that we get to the breaking point where we're like, I have to go take a vacation. And I've rethought that too over the past few years. And I love the fact that you think about it. You've talked about like getting out and having energy and getting connected to the earth. I don't even think about that as being a hippie. Like that's just actually what we should be doing, because if we continue to work ourselves in a way where we get to the breaking point and then we get to go have this thing for a week, whatever that thing might be, a break, a getaway, I don't know that we're really feeding ourselves consistently in the way in which we should. And, you know, if we're looking at vacation as the one time we get to escape, what are we doing the rest of the year? What are we doing to feed ourselves on a daily basis so that we're good to ourselves and each other the next day when we wake up? It can't be because we went to Hawaii and took a week off and hope that that lasts for a few months when we get back.
Yeah. But I do believe we're on a collective paradigm shift with that. I do believe that is going to be changing. Um, it's quite complicated to go into it. I'm actually going to do a solo sode where I just talk about all this stuff that's happening that people aren't aware of. And that is one thing that, especially in the States, like in Europe, they don't work like we do. You know, they appreciate family more and rest more and socialization more. You know, like their whole thing is their big lunch and then their siesta and then they go back to work. And that's been going on for a very, very long time. It's really truly in a lot of Asian countries where they're too driven, and then in the United States where it's like that hamster wheel, you know. And this whole breakdown, this whole COVID thing, as bad as it was, there was a lot to be said for it because it gave people time to reflect on the importance of things that they weren't even looking at the time, you
Mm-hmm.
know. So I think it helped people change their perspective, some better, some worse, but it gave them a chance to reflect, you know. But I do think it's going to change. So I have some more questions for you before you run out of time, Marnie. So what is your primary job? Like, what's your career besides an author?
So I, for the last almost 7 years, have been a talent and learning and development leader in healthcare. And my where I'm currently at is with Everside Health. We provide the number one direct on-site, near-site care for employers who are providing primary care for their employees. And so I've worked in the healthcare space for a while. I've been there. I've also been at a large organization doing the same thing. And I've also been at an air medical organization. And a lot of that attraction to healthcare, because prior to that, I was in IT and an email intelligence company. Prior to that, you know, going from that sort of to healthcare, a lot of losing my dad and his experiences, both good and bad, actually attracted me to healthcare. Because you know what I do, people could argue a lot of what I do is helping support the business, whether it be through executive development, whether it be through how do we, you know, think about our workforce and how are we supporting them so they can do their very best work? How do we engage them? What's their experience here at work? You could do that at almost any organization, but there's something about healthcare that has kept me in it, which is it's really rewarding to provide that kind of support to the people who are expected and are trying to provide that kind of support to our patients, you and me, and your listeners. And so being a consumer of that, as well as being on the other side, which is helping support those who do that, is a really, really great way for me to spend my career doing that. And there's instances in my book where I talk about those experiences and how I've worked with leaders and how I've worked with teams around that. So I kind of feel like I can talk about it and I can write about it, but I'm also always experimenting with it and I'm experiencing it myself and sharing a lot of the stories and both the successes and the struggles that I've gone through as a leader in an organization.
Well, I bet you've had one hell of a year.
Yes. Yes, it has been very interesting. And I talk about one of the specific things, which was, you know, when COVID hit, especially being in a healthcare organization, my team had pivoted very quickly to help support thousands of physicians getting stood up on telemedicine. And it wasn't just about how to learn to use a technology. This was about the fact that we were helping guide physicians through a mindset of what it meant to treat patients, when so much of their identity for many of them was, I treat patients because I see them. I touched them. I talked to them in my office. And when they couldn't do that, there was a little bit of an identity crisis, quite frankly, happening for physicians and clinical staff, because this changed everything for them of how, they create those connections. So that was a lot of what we did, was really talking about how do you make that connection through a Zoom environment, a video environment. And there was a lot of, from a psychology standpoint, certainly a coaching standpoint. And many, I don't think, realized that was also a challenge. Not only were people getting very sick, and we lost a lot of people through this, the weight that was put on our healthcare workers, not just because they were working long hours, but they were having to think about their work in very different ways, just like all of us were.
Yeah, I bet. Not to make light of it, but have you ever seen that cartoon with the Zoom OBGYN appointments?
No, but I immediately had an image come to mind. I can imagine that's what it is. Right. Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine. I certainly didn't have to meet with my nurse practitioner or my OBGYN during that, but I did meet with my primary doc during COVID. And in some cases, there might be some really great silver lining to all of this, which is maybe we don't always have to go into the office. And quite frankly, we might be more willing to reach out now. I hope that happens, because I do think that in some cases where people may have been more hesitant to reach out to a medical professional, whether it to be to talk about having sleep problems or depression, or, something that they, didn't feel right with their heart, maybe they were more willing to go get a physical. I hope that is a silver lining, where people feel now more comfortable to say that there really isn't any excuse for me not to connect with people, with professionals, with whatever I have, and vice versa. Now we don't have to wait for a patient to come in the office, where we can actually connect with them in a number of ways. And how great would that be to provide whole health care to people and meet them where they're at?
Yeah, for sure. That's a really good idea. So you have a full-time job. That sounds like a big job. And then you found time to write a book. How'd you do that?
That is the lesson we talked just a little bit about, which is in my book, which is Work While Others Are on Break. And I talk about this because, it's the full-time job, wanting to write a book. I am a mother to 2 boys. I have a husband. We also want to live life. I want to do other things outside of work. And the way I looked at it was, I always wanted to write a book. So what was it going to take for me to write a book? And so I just tried to wrap my mind around, could I commit for a year? I know some people commit much longer than that, and I don't want to take that away. And I did do what I would consider a fairly accelerated plan on this, but there were times where I had to make some pretty significant trade-offs. I didn't go to something of one of my boys, or maybe both of theirs, or maybe I didn't, eat dinner because I needed to do this or that, or maybe I didn't go somewhere because I was suddenly I was on a roll writing and I needed to do that. And I talk about it in the book as not only something that is, how you think about balance in a different way, and more around trade-offs and where you put your time for maybe finite time periods. But I also think it's really important for us to model. So it's not just, did I have to make those trade-offs, and did my boys see me making those trade-offs? It's the fact that I know that at some point in their lives, they're going to have to do that too. And they're going to have to decide where they put their time. And what's most important is that they learn how to communicate with the people that are important to them. Because that was the big deal for me, was I don't just tell my boys, like, I can't come to your game. I can't come to your game because I actually need to spend a couple hours editing this. And you know what? I figured out if I do that today, I'll be able to come to your game on Monday. And then we talk about it. And, if you think about the energy that creates, if I don't say those things, if I don't communicate to my boys that way, if I don't let them know the why behind all of it, well, now there could be hurt feelings and animosity, and there could be a number of other things. And I think that about with my marriage too. I could do that with my relationship with my husband, and maybe not tell him certain things. And but I've just really committed that not only is it important, and it's part of how you sort of manage, investing in yourself and doing other things beyond just what you might have current aspirations of doing. But the key is, how do you communicate that to the people that matter to you and are important to you so that they understand why you're doing it?
Mm-hmm. Well said. Well
Thank you.
said. I think that makes them feel a level of respect too, that you care enough to take the time to explain the situation. That's cool. So where can people get your book?
So they can go to Amazon.com and they can search for Marney Andes book, or start with the GiveMe Shots and they'll find it there. I'd also love it if people want to connect with me. I continue to write and publish at least every other week on my blog, and you can find that at marneyandes.com. I'm also just sort of continuing to try to connect and create a community there. So I'd love it if your listeners reached out. And then people could connect with me on social media. On LinkedIn, they can find me, Marney Andes, and Instagram as well. I apparently have the name where I don't have to have a bunch of numbers behind it for accounts. So it's just Marney Andes. About anywhere you look, you'll see me on social media. So it's a great way to stay connected. And I love hearing from people, especially if they were able to, read snippets of the book or whatnot and want to share their reactions. Because I think, this is something too, Tracy, that I love to share with people. The collection of the lessons in the book, while they're mine, I believe people will see themselves in these, and maybe they heard them a different way, and maybe they heard them from someone different in their life. But a lot of those lessons are fairly core value lessons that many of us experienced. But I really do, share and invite readers at the end of it to think about the homegrown lessons that they've heard throughout their life. And I think there's a moment for all of us to say, maybe I don't have to go seek something else. Really, what I have to do is internally, maybe remember what I already have within me and what's been taught to me, and just reconnect with those lessons from our childhood, from our early adulthood, whatever it might be. And I love to hear what other people have as their lessons that maybe I didn't capture in the book, or maybe wasn't a lesson that I learned from my dad, but certainly a lesson we can all learn from together.
That is beautiful. I love that you said that. That's like an intuitive journaling prompt, what lesson did I learn that I need to remember right now? And that is awesome. Awesome.
Thank you.
You are adorable. And I just so appreciate you coming on the show today, Marney. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Tracy. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh my gosh, that was such a fun show. Thank you so much for listening. For complete show notes, please head on over to highenergygirl.com/show, and you can get this cute book on Amazon. So if you like the show, please refer it to a friend, and you can help us out by leaving us a rating and review on your favorite podcast app. All right, you guys, thank you so much, and make it a great day. This podcast contains the opinion and thoughts of its host and guests. It is intended to provide helpful and informative material on the subjects covered. All statements made on the podcast have not been evaluated by the FDA and are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent disease. If the listener requires professional assistance or advice, please contact your personal medical doctor. Both host and guest specifically disclaim any responsibility for any liability, loss, or risk, personal or otherwise, which is incurred as a consequence directly or indirectly of the use and application of any of the contents of these episodes. Like I said, this is my opinion and I could be wrong.